Theists in general, they're pretty terrible at evidence or proof, whatever you want to call it. They cannot separate themselves from what they already believe is true in an attempt to justify those beliefs are actually so in the real world. Because, as we all know, they just don't care. So, here comes another example. This is another one of those videos where I said, well, I can do that in one. And then I started writing the script and said, no, that's going to be two. And then I got to recording it and it turned out to be one. Now it's a longer one certainly, but I got it in one. There you go. This time it's an article from Love Worth Finding, a Christian website that claims that there is evidence for God, and then just parrot standard Christian talking points that nobody who isn't already in on the faith would ever take seriously. This is the problem that we constantly see, where they say, we've got evidence, and that evidence is always what they already believe based entirely on their own blind faith. That is not how evidence works, but we'll see it all fall apart as we go on. Strap in because this promises to be a long one. Hope you enjoy. There is strong evidence for the existence of God. We're going to seek to answer the question, is God real? We're going to look at 5 proofs for God's existence. Yeah, I love how proofs is in quotes, because when I heard it, I was hearing giant air quotes in that one. That means it is an actual proof or evidence, since most people just use the terms interchangeably. Theists have evidence, again with giant air quotes, that nobody that didn't already believe this crap on faith would ever take seriously. That's why this article, like virtually all others, is being written for the already faithful. It's not going to convince anybody who isn't already on their side, because they don't want to talk to us. They don't want us to point out all the logical problems with their claims. They just really want to believe. So let's get into this. Is God real? That's a question that people have been asking for thousands of years. Philosophers have written hundreds of thousands of pages in response to the question. Scientists have vigorously debated the existence of God. Atheists have long challenged Christians to prove that God exists. So is there proof that God is real? Well, the answer to that, of course, is no. I have said this many, many times before, but any proof or evidence that you present, it needs to be entirely separate from your faith. It can't just rely on the things that you already believe. Well, I believe it, so it's just got to be true. But that doesn't mean anything. But that's all the religious have, right? It depends on what is meant by proof. God can't be seen with the physical eye, so proof doesn't exist in that sense. Then again, most people have never seen $1 million in cash. Just because you can't apprehend something with the senses doesn't mean it doesn't exist. There is strong evidence for the existence of God. In this article, we're going to seek to answer the question, is God real? We're going to look at 5 proofs, again in quotes, of God's existence. The problem here is that too relies entirely on faith. This is where it always breaks down. It's why I ask those 2 questions. The article says, well, God can't be seen by the human eye. How do you know that? Where did you get that little nugget of joy, and how do you back it up in some demonstrable way that will convince people who don't just believe that on faith? What orifice did you yank that one out of? And they don't have an answer for that. If I have faith in, say, the Loch Ness Monster, that doesn't mean that I can just use that faith to justify my beliefs that Nessie is real. That is not going to convince anyone who isn't already convinced. Which is why they don't want to talk to anyone who isn't already convinced. It makes the process a whole lot easier that way, right? Now, I have seen $1,000,000 in cash, a couple times actually, but you don't have to have faith for that because we know and can demonstrate that money is real and $1,000,000 is just a lot of cash put together. Where have they ever proven that a god of any kind is real? Nobody has ever seen a herd of unicorns, but nobody's ever seen a single unicorn either. A group of unseen magical animals is not justifiable in the complete absence of evidence for even one of them. This should be really easy to figure out, but the religious, they don't seem capable of doing so. I wonder why. Proof 1. Jesus. The greatest proof God is real is Jesus Christ. Multiple times he claimed to be God. Obviously, claiming to be God doesn't make a person God. Many people have claimed divinity over the years, but unlike the others, Jesus actually backed up his claim. As you read through the first 4 books of the New Testament, one thing becomes very clear. Jesus was no ordinary man. Except you have no evidence of any kind that Jesus ever lived. This is all just, well, my book says a thing. So what? This is where we have to push aside all of the faith baggage, and there's a lot of that, because I know you've got a book, I know you like the book. I don't care about your book. At least not until you can provide evidence that your book, the actual things in your book, independently can be corroborated. So let's examine the book to see if it is demonstrably reliable, because whether you like it or not, that doesn't matter. I care what you can demonstrate independently of your faith. How do you know that, and how do you prove it? We go right back to those questions. And they have no answers, and the very idea that they ought to, that takes them by surprise, because they're really used to dealing with people who just roll over, no intelligent thought required. It's why they spend all of their time in their own religious echo chambers. That way, they don't have to make an effort. He did incredible, extraordinary, supernatural things. Jesus transformed water into wine in John 2, fed thousands of people with just a few loaves of bread and fish, Mark 6, healed a paralyzed man, Matthew 9, gave sight to the blind, John 9, healed those with leprosy, Matthew 8, raised the dead, John 9, and much, much more. Well, those are certainly claims in your big book of multiple choice, but that doesn't mean that any of it actually happened. You would need to provide independent evidence for each and every one of those. And let's be honest, I'd be happy if they could do it for even one. But then again, as we know, they don't even try to do that. They just really want to believe. This is just shit my book says, and nobody with a brain cares about that. Your book doesn't matter until it is independently corroborated with verifiable evidence, and they aren't even making a good faith effort. This is like saying, well, Harry Potter did a lot of magic. It says so in those books over there. But that doesn't mean anything until you can prove that the books are reliable. And nobody's done that with Harry Potter, and nobody's done that with the Bible. So they're right back at square one. How do you know that Jesus was real and did any of the things reported in your book? Leave your faith at the door. And they can't even define what Jesus they mean. Is it the possible real person or persons upon whom the later myths might have been based? Or the magical man-god that they really, really want to be real? Define your terms, stick to it, and come up with your evidence. And they just don't have anything to present. Yet this does get worse, doesn't it? So let's see how clueless these people actually are. The most extraordinary thing Jesus did was rise from the dead himself. He told his disciples multiple times that he was going to die and rise from the dead. Matthew 16:21, Matthew 17:23, etc. Then everything happened just as he said it would. Really? And how do you know that? Because it says so in a book that you happen to like? So what? I am not impressed with your empty claims. Because here's the thing, since they brought up Matthew, but whoever the hell wrote the book of Matthew, and that we don't have any idea who that might be, but whoever wrote it, there's no way to prove that they were actually an eyewitness to anything. In fact, it looks like they were looking at the Old Testament, finding all the claims in the Old Testament about the coming Messiah, and just filling in the blanks. It was written anonymously and just labeled as Matthew much later. So how do you know that any of this actually ever happened? Because that's another good question to which they have no good answers. They just really want to believe it. He was arrested, beaten, and crucified. A Roman soldier stabbed him in the side and pierced his heart to ensure that he was truly dead. Jesus was buried in a tomb, and a large stone was rolled across the entrance to the tomb. Guards were placed around the tomb to ensure that no one stole the body. No one, including his disciples, actually expected him to rise from the dead. Well, that's your story, though, isn't it? Your story doesn't matter unless your story is true. And the only way to establish truth here is to provide evidence. Independent, verifiable evidence for all of the details that you've given in your story. Got any? I didn't think so. But 3 days later, the tomb was empty. The risen Jesus appeared to many different people, including multiple times to his 12 disciples, Matthew 28, etc., women who had followed Jesus, Luke 24, 1 through 5, 2 men walking along a road, Luke 24:15, a Pharisee named Saul, Acts 9, a crowd of 500, 1 Corinthians 15:6. Jesus can't be ignored. But none of those things are independently corroborable, is it? It's all hearsay at best and pure mythology more likely. This is not impressive. Right about here is where the religious are just headed for the hills because they know they've got absolutely nothing of substance to present. They just want to believe it. Okay, so what? He's not simply a good teacher who serves as a role model. He made extraordinary claims about himself. If he rose from the dead, then all his claims are true. He really is God, and everyone must follow and obey him. The life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ are the greatest proof that God is real. If. They always say if he rose from the dead. Great, now prove he did. Because if doesn't matter. If isn't because. If is if. And that's your cue to back it up. Go ahead. Except you can't prove that any of these things ever happened because Jesus never left any direct, demonstrable evidence for his own existence. It was all done, at least secondhand, probably more, in a book of mythology that you just happen to like. But liking it doesn't make it true. This is where the religious always go wrong. They can't tell the difference between wishful thinking and actual evidence. Actual evidence comes beyond the bounds of your blind faith. You have to be able to back it all up, and they can't get anywhere close. So, as we all know, they just go back to the religious echo chambers where everybody already believes. That way they can feel really, really good about the stuff in their heads. It's a whole lot safer than having to go up against anybody who has a lot of valid questions, isn't it? Proof 2. The universe. A second proof that God is real is the design of the universe. Everywhere we look, there is evidence of orderly, intelligent design. The planets orbit the sun, held in place by gravity. The sun keeps the earth warm enough to sustain life without scorching everything. Rain causes plants to grow, and the plants provide food for animals. It's a beautifully ordered system. But there is no design apparent. This is what happens when you start with an emotionally comforting conclusion just so you can set up the pins so they're really easy to knock down again. All of the claims are, if you squint just right and you don't think about it too much, then maybe you can get to a designer. This is just bald ignorance on display, which I guess isn't at all surprising. They just really want to believe. It's not an ordered system if you understand what's actually going on. In fact, it's incredibly chaotic. They, however, are just looking at it from a very, very basic level. Rain makes the flowers grow. Yeah, except in places where rain is very rare. I mean, plants still grow there most of the time, but they have adapted to having very little water falling on them. The sun keeps everything warm. Yeah, tell that to the people living near the North Pole. The sun doesn't scorch anything. Sure, tell that to all the people who live in the desert. There are places that you cannot live without air conditioning. Some design, right? There is no evidence whatsoever that any of this was caused by a god. Any god, much less your god. That is something that they've just tacked on the end because fifis. But that doesn't make any of it real. Psalm 19, 1 through 2 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge." Yeah, but nobody cares what your silly book says until you can prove that any of it is true. And I don't mean, well, that town was real, or we think that person existed. I mean the very specific supernatural claims recorded in your book. Prove those ever happened. Good luck on that. This is why we go around and around and around in circles with these people, because they just really want it to be true, and we point out all the problems with that assertion, and then they just repeat the same old tired nonsense over and over again. Then they retreat back to easier ground, and we just laugh. Lather, rinse, repeat. The stars and planets declare that there is a God who created and ordered all things. The intricate workings of the universe point to a God who put everything into place. They do absolutely nothing of the sort. It's just physics doing what physics does, and a bunch of gullible idiots going, "Duh, I don't understand, therefore God." This is why we have so many problems with these people, because they just really want it to be true, but they don't care enough to actually prove it. There is a big difference between wanting something to be true and having it be actually true, and they can't understand where they go wrong. The human body is an absolute marvel. Look at any part of the body and you are confronted with evidence of God. Our eyes are able to take in our surroundings and pass that information to our brains, which then interprets what our eyes are seeing. Our hands are able to grasp and manipulate things. Our hearts effortlessly pump again and again, day after day, year after year. The order and excellence of the human body are not the result of accidental evolution. Absolutely all of that is demonstrably false. Now, I just did a video on the heart and all the problems that it has. I mean, arthritis is a thing. Good luck trying to grab anything with an advanced case. This is just another case where we have to ask, how closely have they looked, or have they thought about it at all, or do they just believe it because fifis? Because that's pretty much how all of it goes. Taking these absurd claims apart is really, really simple, but they don't want to hear it, do they? Order and beauty don't accidentally spring from chaos. When we see an intricate painting, we know it was created by a brilliant artist. Even if we don't see the painter, experience tells us that such a thing couldn't have come out by accident. No, because there are all kinds of things that we like looking at that have no demonstrable designer. Our views on beauty come from evolution and culture, not your magical man in the sky. Just making empty claims doesn't make it impressive, but I guess this is the best they can do. Kind of sad, isn't it? The human body is evidence that God is real. God is the brilliant divine artist who created us and the universe in which we live. Except it does absolutely nothing at all of the sort. This is just more, well, I don't get it, therefore God, which is absolutely ridiculous on its face. You don't just get to assign a cause to something that you're too ignorant to understand just because you really like the idea. Yet that's all they do, right? Too bad they can't understand why we laugh. Proof 3. Human longing. The existence of a particular desire within us is evidence of the existence of that thing. For example, the desire for food proves that food exists. We love sunshine because the sun is real, and feeling the sun on our faces makes us happy. We don't desire things that don't exist. The longings we feel point to realities outside of us. Every person longs for the transcendent. I don't. I know a lot of theists don't believe that, but I honestly don't, and I hear from tons of atheists that they don't either. Of course, the religious, as we all know, they often think that everyone is just like they are, even though they are demonstrably wrong. I have no interest in the transcendent. I'm perfectly fine with the here and now. I have no interest in eternal life. I'm perfectly fine dying when my life is over. This is just, but I want everybody to be just like I am. But that is not how it goes. So let's do an impromptu poll in the comments. Do you long for the transcendent? Let me know. The other claim that, well, if it's not real, you wouldn't think about it, is ludicrous. That's what fiction is about. People have told stories about things that aren't real forever. Dragons, unicorns, leprechauns, yada, yada, yada. The list goes on and on and on. All of these things aren't real, yet humans dreamed them up and have thought about them forever. Why? Because humans are creative, and they make stuff up, just like they made up God. We all want to experience something bigger than ourselves. We don't go to the Grand Canyon to marvel at how amazing we are. We go because we want to be in awe of the sheer size and depth of it. We want to look down into the Grand Canyon and say, wow, just look at it. Yeah, but frankly, I don't have any interest in that. Oh, I mean, I know there are some people who just love to go to places to see spectacle, but that's not me. I don't go on vacation to see things. I go on vacation to do things. I want to accomplish stuff, not just stand there and go, wow. That is not me, and that has never been me. It will never be me. That is why I don't just look up and go, ooh, when I look at the universe. I mean, yeah, the universe is cool and all, but it's just a thing. We just so happen to evolve here. It doesn't really demand reverence. I've got too much to do to worry about that. The desire for transcendence is what motivates us to seek out thrills. We jump out of airplanes and ride roller coasters because we long to experience something big and beautiful. Again, that's not me. I mean, yeah, I love a good roller coaster, and I've jumped out of an airplane here and there, but it wasn't the thrill of it that made me do it. It was the simple enjoyment and spending time with the people I was doing it with. I am not an adrenaline junkie. Like I said, there's way too much out there that I want to do. I don't just want an experience. I want to do stuff. The problem is that our longing for transcendence can't be satisfied by anything in this world. No matter how much money we make, or thrills we experience, or power we attain, we won't be satisfied. Why can't we find satisfaction? Because we were made for God. We were made to know and love God. See, this is where these claims of evidence and proof go so wrong. Nothing that he said in this entire article has been evidence. It's just a bunch of bald claims and empty assertions made because they fit the pre-existing religious beliefs of the adherent. Well, I'm going to tell you what I believe. Yeah, but I don't care what you believe. I care what you can demonstrate. Your beliefs are of absolutely no consequence to anybody but you. Sad they can't figure that out. In his book, Confessions, Augustine famously said to God, "Thou hast formed us for thyself, and our hearts are restless till they find rest in thee." The deep longing and restlessness we so often feel points to the reality of God. Just as hunger leads us to food and thirst to water, our longing for transcendence ultimately leads us to God. Except it doesn't. Oh, I know what you believe and what you want, but that doesn't mean anything. Because if you look at a Hindu, they'll say it leads to Krishna, or one of the other of their pantheon of gods. Just saying a thing doesn't make that thing true. When we ask for evidence, and that's what this whole thing is supposed to be about, that is asking you to show that what you want to be true is actually true. Not what you want, what you can prove. Show us that the God that you believe in is real, entirely outside of your head. Because if you can't, you are just wasting everybody's time. Proof 4. Logic. A fourth proof that God is real is logic. We live in a cause and effect universe. Literally nothing happens without a cause. Even the most seemingly random events can be traced back to a definite cause. Whenever something happens, we try to figure out what caused it. The universe could not come into existence out of nothing. Both science and experience tells us that something cannot come from nothing. Well, of course, we've done this one to death too. Nobody says that anything comes from nothing. Nobody but the religious. They are projecting their own mythology onto others. They're just idiots. Yet, no matter how many times we explain this to them, they keep doing it because it's useful to their apologetics. Truth doesn't seem to matter. The people who say this are not the people who are properly educated to know what the hell they're talking about. We don't know if we live in a cause and effect universe. It seems to work from our experience, but our direct experience is extremely limited to a single insignificant planet in the middle of the back end of nowhere. That is not to diminish our accomplishments, of course, but to put them in context. We are just not that hot. And I know that bothers a lot of people, but too bad. We try to figure things out, but that doesn't mean that we're always successful. Religion exists because ancient people tried to figure things out, and when they failed, based on their lack of knowledge that they had at the time, and that's perfectly understandable, but they just invented a bunch of ad hoc explanations, gods in other words, to just explain the things that they couldn't otherwise explain. And then, when they actually came up with explanations, they were too wedded to their gods to give them up. Just because you really want an explanation, that doesn't mean you always have one. It doesn't mean you always have one right now. And that's something else the religious don't seem to understand. Something that already existed must have caused the universe to exist. That something is God. Yeah, but that's just special pleading. This thing that we want to fill in as an answer for everything, well, we're just going to make up a bunch of characteristics about it, and we're going to call it God. But that doesn't mean it exists, and that doesn't make it a God. That just makes you gullible, and that's no surprise. In Genesis 1:1-3, we read, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Then God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light." In other words, my book says a thing. So what? Because you notice that every time the religious say they've got evidence, that evidence always requires that you accept all the things that they believe as true. It's never, well, here's how we know God is real, and here's all the steps we went through to prove it. It's, well, of course God is real. Here's a bunch of comforting platitudes that'll make you feel good if you already believe it. But that is not impressive. Not at all. Before the universe existed, God existed. He is the first cause. Everything exists because of Him. The fact that there is a universe at all points to the fact that God is real. If God did not exist, nothing else would exist. And all of that is just your own empty claims. Nothing more. Well, of course invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies exist. Yeah, that doesn't fly. I want to see your evidence for why you think they exist. Leave your faith at the door. And, of course, they can't do that because they aren't really concerned about the facts. They just want to believe. But wanting to believe is not enough. You have to be able to independently, rationally, and evidentially justify your beliefs first. Proof 5. Morality. Oh good, here we go again. Another proof of God's existence is the existence of morality. Every person, regardless of culture or upbringing, has a sense of right and wrong. We know that it's wrong to take another person's life or steal their belongings. Every society has a justice system responsible for upholding right and punishing wrongdoing. If a criminal escapes justice, we're outraged. Where does this innate sense of right and wrong come from? Well, it doesn't exist. Now, I've gone over this many times before, but the people who tend to make claims like this, they tend to be very insulated. They live in a society where those particular moral precepts are present and they've never left it. They certainly have never gone that far astray, at least. They are not well educated in world history. They are not world travelers. In fact, they're probably not educated in the history of the country they live in to any significant degree. Morals are what they grew up with, and everybody else had to agree to them. So there. Except that is not at all true. For those of us who've actually been out there, it's very clear that their assertions are not at all true. Now, I haven't been in deepest, darkest Africa. I haven't hung out with the Aborigines in the outback of Australia, but even places that are largely Western in their outlook, the concept of morality is very different depending on where you are. If you just travel across the country and do more than wave to people out the window, you are going to find that moral values change pretty quickly. If you study history, you're going to figure out that 50 years ago, the morals that existed then, a lot of them don't exist today. There is no innate sense of anything. This is all just wishful thinking. It comes from God. Says who? Oh, I know it's emotionally comforting to think that, but again, we are not at all concerned with your comfort. We want to see your facts. How do you know it doesn't come from, I don't know, Nzambi Mpungu, the creator god of the Bakongo people of Central Africa? I know you don't want that to be true, but that doesn't matter. How do you get from, I really like the idea, to here is what is demonstrably so? How do you get from there to here? It's the verifiability that we care about, and sadly, they have absolutely no means whatsoever to prove it. We all know that some things are right and some things are wrong because God instilled those things into us. Our sense of good and evil comes from the God who is good and who opposes evil. Except that we don't. You wish people did. Inside your little insular echo chamber, people profess the same beliefs that you have, but that doesn't make it so. What they are presenting here, it isn't evidence. It's blind confirmation bias. It's, here are all the things that we already believe, so we're going to say things that make us feel better about the things that we already believe, so we can continue to believe them. But that doesn't make any of it true. Extricate yourself from your fifis and your faith and try again. But I don't suspect any of them will try. If God does not exist, then there is no such thing as ultimate right and wrong. No one can claim that anything is truly good or bad. The existence of morality points to the existence of God. If God is not real, there would be no morality. Except we know that's not true because we know where morality actually comes from. Empathy mixed with enlightened self-interest is the basis of all morality, not some farcical magical man in the sky. But I really want it to be true doesn't mean anything. This is not what the evidence actually shows is going on. There is no such thing as ultimate morals. Just because you really like the idea, that doesn't make it true. Morals demonstrably change, both across the planet and throughout history. If that wasn't the case, then Christians wouldn't be struggling with things like slavery and the Bible today. Never thought about that one, did they? I think it's pretty clear that these people never actually think about much of anything. Is God real? Yes, he is. Not that you have any real evidence for or anything, that's just a claim. This whole article, like every article claiming to have evidence for God, proves that they don't have any actual evidence for anything, nor any understanding of what evidence really is. Evidence isn't that thing that gets you where you want to go. It's what shows you what is actually going on in the real world that we all share. Sadly, the religious just have none of that, do they? If you have questions about God, don't stop until you get answers. I did that once. It's how I became an atheist, because I stopped giving a damn what had been forced into my head against my will as a child, and I started asking all of the difficult questions. Is any of this actually true? And if it was, how could I tell? Because if it is true, then it had to be true entirely beyond my faith. It had to have evidence in the real world, and once I started down that path, all of the religious dominoes started to fall. All of them. The second you start to look at the actual Bible, not the feel-good stories that you hear from the pulpit, the whole thing, then the whole thing starts to fall apart. Without the Bible, there's no good reason to believe in any of the stories, and most importantly, the very existence of any gods. It comes from being honest with yourself and with the actual evidence that we have. It's why theists refuse to do it. It's why theists are terrified of us. The truth is that God wants you to know Him. He wants to have a real personal relationship with you. That deep longing that you feel in your heart, that thing I don't have, that's from Him. That sense that there has to be more to life, that's from God. Well, that's what your book says, but it's a simple thing to do away with the Bible if you just sit down and study. And that also goes for all the other religious texts, because they all have the exact same problems. If you can't approach these belief systems from a blank slate without any faith or belief whatsoever, and still get to God is real with a lot of evidence to back it up, then you've got no business believing in any of it at all. That's what we ask for. The evidence that gets you from nothing to belief without, I really, really want it to be true in the middle. And that's what no religion can provide, because they're all just bullshit. It's not that hard to understand. Jesus came to earth so that you could know that God is real. Again, that's just what it says in your storybook. That doesn't make it true. We are not after emotionally comforting platitudes. We want objectively verifiable facts, and they just don't have any. Get a Bible and read about Jesus in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. As you read, ask yourself, who is this man? Well, he's a myth. Even if there was a real person or persons upon whom these myths were ultimately based, what actually appears in the Bible is just bullshit. That is what the evidence actually shows. No, they don't like it very much, of course, but what they like doesn't matter. They are after comfort, not fact. I was after fact, not comfort. And look where I ended up. And many other theists who had the guts to set aside their feelings and try to verify that the Bible or other holy books were actually true, it didn't turn out that way for them either. If you're honest and you have integrity, you tend to turn into an atheist. That's why religion is dying, because people are catching on to the scam. If you search for God, you'll find Him. Nope. I found exactly the opposite, and so do most other people. It's not that I didn't want to maintain a belief in God. I was absolutely positive that when I went through this whole process, I would come out the other end a stronger Christian than when I went in. It just didn't work out that way. It's why I don't put up with the irrational faith train today, because I know better. I've been there. I've seen it fall apart the second that you set aside its most ridiculous assumptions. Religion relies on wishful thinking. Wishful thinking doesn't get you anywhere demonstrably real. It's why this whole article was laughably terrible. It's why they just don't want to talk to us, because we know better, and they ought to too. It's really a shame that they don't.